The 1990 house was originally built as a working class residence and set in the rural outskirts of Tiruvalla amongst sugarcane farms. A typical dwelling, the style of which is found in Kerala even today. The 1990 house is a single story concrete slab structure which is 9 grid in plan, where private rooms are arranged around a central hall. Arched openings, plain plastered walls, sloped shading slabs, and centrally placed identical windows comprise its exteriors. The clients in their retirement age wanted to alter their 30-year-old house according to changed lifestyles and landscape. The new program also needed to address the aspirations of the elder son and an architect's Soho for his use. The significance of the story of this existent house and its memory formed an integral part of the new narrative, as we considered our responsibility for what we choose to keep and leave out. The design process differentiated built forms as per its period of construction and thereby into separate functions. Conserving a building, keeping its cultural nostalgia intact without compromising on any of the spatial conveniences of the modern era was our primary concern. We withheld the urge to romanticize the past and rather chose to use its remains as a stimulus to present a modern aesthetic and philosophical interpretation. The new architectural expression simplifies the whole into regular forms and strongly distinguishes the old and new as separate layers and eventually materials. Concrete, cement blocks, steel and glass used for the new construction now sit in contrast with the white plastered walls of the old construction. The dialogue between old and new is a conscious effort to create a unity made out of fragments. Spatial systems like the tower, the garden pavilion, and the central hall followed the same logic of expression, but started to legitimize the newly added functions and practices of the home. The project was of significant personal interest to us, and we found meaning in it time and time again, through stages of drawing and stages of making. We continuously reflected on the aspect of memory and domestic space. It recalls a thought by Aldo Rossi on fragments, claiming that only ruins express a fact completely. One can use the example of ruins or demolitions of houses to illustrate how traces of life and the history of inhabitation can be read in the minutest fragment. While designing the architectural experience for the present, the process adopts the accidents, collisions, juxtapositions, and other existing architectural relationships that were inherent to the building before our encounter with it. On a building that already had many layers from the past, adding a new imaginative layer results in a modern solution rather than a mere restoration of parts. The new layer is visibly yet seamlessly intertwined with the past. New elements added to this create a complex yet distinct dialogue superimposed in a composite photograph. We consciously use the new materials, namely cement blocks, steel and glass, to stitch together the essence of the old construction with newer modern requirements, simultaneously preserving the nostalgia of the original home. Rather than preserve the individual parts like in typical renovation projects, fragments from the entire house are preserved in a more holistic way that are of aesthetic interest and memory. Most of the furniture in the house is handed down in the family and carefully restored. The construction material for this humble house was procured in its own neighborhood within a 100-meter radius, and much of the steel fabrication was done locally. The 1990 house brings together the old and the new, not only in its formal geometry, but also in the haptic experience of its spaces through the use of materials. This constant act of remembrance keeps the stories of its inhabitants alive, the ones who built it, the ones who live in it, and the one who no longer does. In doing so, it becomes a tribute to the memory of a loved one. It reaffirms our core belief that nothing once existed is ever lost because the past is partly experienced in the present.
Thank you. The floor is open for jury comments.
Hi. I think it's a beautiful kind of adaptation and a kind of great adaptive reuse of an existing project. I found the clarity of thinking in the conceptualization of the house to be, very kind of on point. And also, I think the drawings and the representation, bring out that kind of clarity as well. However, I don't know if it's to do with the photographs or the way they've taken or I don't know, but my feeling is that I'm not getting that same clarity or that same intention maybe in the experience of the project. And in that, it kind of, leaves me thinking that has it remained an intellectual exercise alone and not really an experiential one? So, yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
I was just going to say the same. For me, the narrative was so powerful and strong. And as an idea level to kind of, have this whole separation and clarity. Yes, and I also felt the same, unfortunately. But yes, beautiful narrative, must say that.
It was an academic process in a way. To try and bring that validation of the old and the new. So every element that is added sort of emphasizes that. There's also, this project is also worked with a very tight budget. So the selection of materials to where we source it from, all of that was, these decisions were guided by those factors as well. But in the end, at the end, I think the effort was to remain honest to what was already there, and to make sure that that is always seen in juxtaposition with the new.
Yeah. And to add to that, I don't think cost has anything to do with the choice of materials. And I think there is no material actually has a value to it. It's purely how you utilize it. So a simple floor, a cement floor can also look as charming as an Italian marble. So I think those values we add as how we give color. No,
sorry. Just want to add one thing. It's interesting to bring up that it was an academic exercise in a sense. All good design should be, right? And I think what you probably mean by that is, or what at least I understand, is that there's great rigor and thought to what you do. But eventually, if that kind of way of thinking doesn't lead to spaces that are kind of delightful or bring joy and are only understood, by a select few people, I mean, it kind of remains a kind of internal act. It doesn't become public, or you're not able to share your intentions with others. I mean, so. And in that, in kind of depriving others of enjoying that kind of intentionality or purpose, it takes something away, so.
Yeah, I would take off a bit of a tangent from. I found it quite interesting. I think it would have been good to see plans. I didn't get to pause on the plans to look at it properly. To understand it better. I found it quite interesting in the sense that it's almost on one hand I found the use of whether a cable runs across the wall and I like that composition. So I think if you could focus a bit more, if I could have a better reading of the plans and how the spaces work actually I would probably read it better. If I may ask, who's done the artwork in the house, the paintings in the house?
Some of the artwork was sourced from multiple internet sources and all of that, and there are a few pieces that are done by the architect's son, the son of the clients.
And one thing I found interesting, which having been through the screening process, I think I like the notion of dark space, and somehow that's what stood out in the entry to me. It's something which I don't see a lot, and somehow I feel, I don't know, it's maybe a comfort level that I am used to, but I find that quite interesting. And somehow that was captured quite well in the project,
Yeah, the original house, the typical original house, it was very closed and, the typical window sizes and all of that. So even though there is an opening out that happened in the process, the larger windows came in, glass was introduced and all of that. But yet there is that depth of, that the darkness of.
I think to me, like if I look at Padmanabhapuram Palace or something, it's always reflected light that makes the space, and somehow in this context, I'm very comfortable with darker spaces, so it's always a reflected, this thing of light that actually illuminates it. So I found that movement towards darker space quite interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.